You kind of see this theme of the identity industry needing to be more flexible rather than these rigid guidelines that there have really always been.
Today's guest is Dmitri Altum, staff security engineer at GitLab and someone who's not afraid to challenge how we think about identity, access, and the role of security in fast-moving organizations. Dmitri's experience at rapidly growing companies such as Ramp helps him bring a fresh perspective to some of IT's most entrenched practices. Whether it's rethinking how identity is managed or pushing security teams to align more closely with the business, he's focused on building systems that are not only secure, but also scalable, flexible, and resilient. In this episode, we dig into the future of identity, the risks of security teams turning inward, and the power of rethinking access, not just as control, but as strategic leverage. Dmitri, welcome to Patch Me If You Can.
Well, thank you, Eric. I'm really excited to be here. I'd take some time to sing your accolades as well, but I don't think we'd have enough time for that. We'd be here for quite a while.
Thank you so much. Well, let's dig into this with the big one, identity. Before coming on the show, you mentioned to me that there's an over-reliance on role-based access control. What do you think the main problem with RBAC is as it's used today?
Yeah, so I think probably we should start with a definition of role-based access control for anyone listening who may not be familiar, but it's the concept of assigning privileges or permissions to a person based on their role, the title they have at a job. And especially in modern companies, what that ends up causing is a lot of inflexibility. You don't have the option to really be dynamic with who has permissions to do what. Especially in today's modern age of AI, we're seeing role boundaries really be blurred. We're seeing things like product designers shipping code, like salespeople building apps, like marketing gurus running their own CI/CD pipelines. And so we really need to get away from this concept of, because I have this title, these are the things I do at this company. We're causing companies to slow down, and it's kind of feeding into the fact that IT and security have really always been seen as a cost center rather than an enabler. It's taking time away from people being productive and getting their jobs done.
Can you tell me about a moment where you saw RBAC fail, or when you realized that we need a more dynamic and contextual approach to identity?
Yeah, so I think for me, it wasn't any one specific dramatic moment. There wasn't a click at a time when an event happened. It was really a kind of a summation of the data I'd been seeing. I think something that's really easy to do as we grow in our careers is kind of forget a little bit of the day-to-day. We're so focused on the strategic thinking and these larger projects that we're running that we get away from what is actually happening for people in, say, a help desk role and the problems that people are facing as they're joining their companies. And for a little bit of context, a lot of companies like to set up their access request process or their identity governance tools to say, okay, people in this department can access these things or can request these different tools. And so what I saw happening, as I liked to kind of stay in touch with our help desk and really read the data, was that you just see request after request come in of saying, hey, I need access to this certain tool, but I can't find where to request it, or it doesn't show up in our tool for me to request. And so the more I talked to people and the more I communicated with our IT management and our help desk, I saw that becoming a really pervasive problem and realized we needed to shift away from just defining who can request access to what and focus more on how that access gets fulfilled instead.
What kinds of processes did you set up to do that?
I think there's a lot to be said, especially in this modern age of AI, that there's so much data that we can ingest and process that we weren't able to on just a human level before, where you may have teams and teams of analysts. Now you can help leverage technology to make those decisions by pulling in data, things like audit logs from these tools that you're using to understand, okay, is this a normal behavior? It's not just oh, this person is in this role, so we're good to go, or no, they can't because they're in this role. It's really understanding the behaviors. I think an analogy that I like to kind of point to is, traditional banks and things like credit cards and debit cards, where it used to be 20 years ago, you'd go overseas and you'd go to buy something and, oh, you'd get that dreaded, oh, your card's locked, please contact the card issuer. And you go, oh, I forgot to call the bank and tell them I was going overseas. And nowadays, you don't see that anymore. The technology has evolved using things like tap to pay and chips, where they have more signal to understand what's outside of a normal behavior pattern. And that's the way that the identity industry needs to shift as well, is really focusing on behaviors and risks rather than just these very rigid guidelines. And so you're looking at typical identity governance and administration, or IGA tools, to bring in AI and to help kind of view your environment as a whole and evaluate that risk, not just on this one access request, but on what is happening at your company as a whole. So those are the kind of processes that we're looking to really start building on as an industry.
I remember the first time I made a phone call to the credit card company because I was going overseas, and they're like, yeah, you don't need to do that anymore.
I catch myself doing it all the time too. I'll open a chat with them and I'll say, oh, hey, oh, you know what? Actually, sorry, I don't even need to do this anymore. You're right. So, yep, it's definitely thankfully a thing of the past.
So it's interesting. It sounds like what you're advocating is analyzing the behaviors rather than relying on the static role.
Yeah, it's very much a more dynamic attribute-based approach. It's saying, is this coming from a location that we expect, a device that we know? Do we see other people performing similar actions at similar times? There's always going to be outliers. Don't get me wrong. No behavior engine will ever catch everything. But I really think that technology is getting good enough that we can start to lean on it. And something that I think really speaks to me is the fact that, especially AI, it's the worst it's ever going to be right now. The more we're utilizing it and the more context we're giving it about what's going on in our environments, the better it's going to be. So I'm super bullish on leaning in and having it help ingest that data and analyze it and make those decisions, because it's only going to get better with time and practice.
I like that. It's the worst it's ever going to be today, and it's only going to get better. How do you think we should be evolving identity management with that in mind, especially in fast-moving, high-scale organizations like RAMP and GitLab?
I think it's a focus on enablement. I've seen other episodes of your show where guests have kind of talked about the fact that IT and security are traditionally seen as a cost center. And that's what we need to move away from. We need to stop focusing so much on, here's this internal project that's just focused on improving security and, building our walls higher. And we really need to build smarter gates instead. It's not about just blocking things. It's about enabling people to go do things faster and more easily. The faster we can have a developer go ship a new feature, the more customers are going to take advantage of that customer, and sales is going to be able to sell that feature. And so it's trying to get away from just, okay, we're locking this down, we're trying to build this to be 100% secure, and more kind of analyzing, how can we build this so that the business can achieve their goals.
I know you've had to pivot pretty quick in the past when leadership pushed back on security tooling, like the time an exec vetoed YubiKeys at the last minute. How did you adjust courses without compromising your goals?
Yeah, so that was definitely a pivotal moment for me, no pun intended, personally. It was very much the start of the shift away from this, we just need to build things securely mindset. And so essentially what happened is we had really focused for a couple months on how we were going to roll out YubiKeys in a really user-friendly way. And we were at the point of clicking order, and one of our executives came and said, hey, if this causes a single engineer to be able to respond to a single incident 1% slower, it's too much for me. We are a customer-centric business. We need to be able to respond to incidents quickly. We need to be able to take care of our customers so that they know we have our backs. Customer trust is everything. And that was something that I really started to think about as an IT and security team too. If you think about it, our our coworkers at our company are our customers. And so we need to think about how are we impacting their ability to respond to things like incident, to do their job. And so it was something that I took away and I looked at it and I said, okay, how do we keep that in mind? How do we say we're not going to 100% security, we're going to 80% security, 90% security without getting that last 10% where it's going to slow the business down? So at the time, it was passkeys were very new, but that was something that we started to look at. It was right after the summer where Apple had started to introduce them, and so overall, it was a super new technology. But it really made me think, okay, we need to be on top of these evolving technologies. We need to be pushing the boundaries of how can we do things like phishing resistant without just sticking to, oh, YubiKey is the gold standard. That's what we're going to do. We needed to be more flexible. And so you kind of see this theme of the identity industry needing to be more flexible rather than these rigid guidelines that there have really always been.
In that pivot, can you talk about the importance of communication with your customers, your users, and with leadership at the same time?
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely a big one. And something that I took away as well was, getting communication early and often. You think of things like canary or pilot groups for people who are doing things early. And this is something that we had done. We had involved some people early. We had selected test groups. But what we realized was we hadn't quite communicated all the way up with the business and aligned with their objectives. So kind of sticking back on that enablement theme, it was a focus on security. And so we took a step back and said, hey, how do we open these lines of communication so that as a security team, we're thinking about what the business is trying to achieve and how our changes may impact that. So it was starting up earlier, involving more senior leadership earlier to understand where the business was going, making sure that as a security team, we understood the business and the industry and not just thinking, oh, hey, security is kind of the same across all the industries. It's what is our company trying to do today, tomorrow, 6 months in the future, and how are the changes we are making going to impact that? So it really made a much stronger cross-functional partnership to understand the direction that a business is going and making sure that we are aligning ourselves with that rather than just aligning with security.
Yeah, in a fast-moving business and fast-moving organization, it's hard to keep up with the context of where the business is going sometimes, and just underscores the importance of that communication.
Yeah, absolutely.
And by having those canary groups and gathering data, I imagine that information helped that exec put the brakes and say, hey, this isn't actually doing what this is making us 1% slower, not 1% faster.
Yeah, absolutely. We were able to kind of ingest that data and really take a DPS or data positioning system approach. We were able to monitor things like login times and see how fast people were able to get through a login flow and understand, okay, hey, you know what? We saw an incident arise. We didn't see a response till 10 minutes later. Why was that? Talk to the user and they say, oh, you know what? I couldn't find my YubiKey, or, oh, I had left my YubiKey at home and I was 50 minutes away from home. And so I wasn't able to respond right away. And so it was those types of considerations that really sparked a key for me to say, okay, hey, we need to rethink this entire approach.
Speaking of rethinking, once you started moving away from static access models and thinking more strategically about identity, what kind of work did that unlock for you and your team?
Yeah, so this is where you get to some of the really cool stuff as a security engineer. You get to start thinking about, how do I find ways to enable devs to work faster while increasing security? So something that I kind of like to call back on is a project for removing standing access to production data at a company. And you think, okay, hey, great, super easy. Let's just remove their access. When they need it, they request it. But again, that then slows people down. It starts making features take longer. And so you get to start really looking at the workflow as a whole. You get to start talking to your developers and understand what is the flow for how you design things, how you're shipping code. And you find ways that you can build into that without slowing them down. And so if there are specific things they do, for example, what we ended up doing was essentially saying, as you're making these push requests, we're going to automatically open an access request, ingest behavior data, and approve or escalate it as needed. And what we found was that over about 5,000 requests over the course of multiple months, 93% of the requests were able to be automatically approved with a 3-second change time. And so between the time a developer wanted to access production data and when they could access production data only took 3 seconds. And so that wasn't noticeably slowing them down, but we had drastically improved our security posture by not having that standing access. And so we were able to do a lot of really cool things with speeding them up while improving our security posture and just coming together as a team to make that work.
Now, that 3-second delay, how does that compare to like, was there a different like 30-second delay, or how does that stack up?
If you think about it, standing access, there probably wasn't a delay. So over the course of a year, 2 years, 3 years, maybe that 3 seconds adds up. But realistically, for the benefit we were getting, it was an acceptable change. It wasn't noticeable to a developer because by the time they had switched tabs or gone to do something, it had already happened. And so realistically, at the end of the day, it wasn't an increase in time because of just everything that they go through during the day. And so it was a healthy balance of improving our posture, our security posture, while not drastically increasing any sort of response time.
So they didn't have to actively wait those 3 seconds. They could hit submit and then go do something else.
Exactly. It was all running in the background. They weren't required to go log into a tool and submit a request or ping someone in Slack and say, hey, I need access to this. It was a great combo of both.
You've said that IT and security teams need to stop looking inward and focus more on business value. Do you want to expand on what your philosophy around that is?
Yeah. So I think traditional IT and security teams really fall into the trap of optimizing for technical perfection rather than business outcomes, kind of like I talked about earlier. So we're focusing on reducing vulnerabilities to zero or implementing the most robust controls possible and making sure that at the time of entry, everyone is good to go and it's super secure, or even, perfect compliance scores. But in reality, businesses don't succeed because of those things. They don't succeed because you have zero vulnerabilities. They don't succeed because your authentication policy is absolutely perfect and accounts for every edge case. They succeed because of the other things that are happening. And so the way we need to look at it is enabling that growth, is saying, hey, how do we go from making this as secure as possible to making this secure enough to enable the business to achieve their outcomes? It's all a risk-based approach. There's kind of a classic term in the compliance world of risk accepted. And that's something that security needs to lean on a little bit more and understand kind of the industry the business is in, and understand the attack vectors that a malicious actor may take and say, okay, how do we optimize for a healthy balance rather than that technical perfection of zero?
What does that mind shift look like in practice? Like, how do teams embed this mind shift into their everyday work?
So I think a really key one is what metrics you're measuring. And especially at mature companies, this may be really easy and this may be something that everyone does and they have great reporting on it. But especially in startups and in quickly moving companies, we don't always have great robust data. We have, hey, there's a Slack channel with a bunch of requests. And so you start to look at measuring those things to say, how quickly are new hires becoming productive, or how seamlessly can they access what they need for critical business processes? So things like measuring that 3-second change from when a developer tries to get access to when they actually have access is focusing on kind of those inner details that fall between the cracks of processes sometimes. A real world example may be, rather than saying, I'm going to have the most restrictive multi-factor authentication across all our policies, is, hey, 80% of my day-to-day work occurs in these tools. We're going to make that a really seamless experience. And when you go to perform a sensitive action or an administrative action, we're going to step up that MFA request and say, okay, we actually need a little bit more data. Now that you're getting into the sensitivity, we're going to ensure that you are who you say you are. We're going to do a little more check on that validity. And so finding ways to make it seamless for most of the time while still protecting that sensitivity is really crucial.
Thanks for the practical, like real actions. I think it's going to be really helpful for people moving forward. How do you personally make sure your security initiatives stay aligned with the business, especially when security and speed are pulling in different directions?
Yeah, so I think something you said there really, really speaks to me is the fact that security and speed pull in different directions. I think that isn't always necessarily true. So a great example of this is, say you're installing a new front door in your house. And you say to yourself, cool, I'm going to get a door with this beautiful glass window. I can see who's coming in. It looks great. But if you stop to think about it, you say, actually, you know what? Someone could break that glass window and flip that lever on the inside, and all of a sudden I have access to their house. And so you step back, you take 10 seconds and you think, I'm going to install a door that only has a window at the top, or I'm going to install a lock that has a key set on both sides instead of a lever lock. Now, does installing the door take the same amount of time no matter which lock type you have on there? Absolutely. And so you find ways to balance that speed and security. You make some trade-offs and you say, I can still move quickly. I can still do the things I want to do while increasing security. Now, granted, does that analogy always hold true? No. Certainly some doors may be more complex. You're going to run into projects that require more complexity, that require better testing. And that's where you run into the problem of how do we align those when they are pulling in separate directions. And I lean back on that risk accepted. You need to understand your industry and understand what your company is trying to do. So it's talking to the leadership, it's talking to your leaders and your teammates and figuring out what does our roadmap look like? What are the objectives that we want to achieve? And making sure we're balancing against those and not just securing everything 100% all the time and locking people out.
I like the door analogy a lot. If you could instantly patch something in your world, what would that be?
So I think the cliche answer that I really like is a signals framework. Something I talked about earlier is ingesting a lot of data to understand behavior. And there are a lot of applications that don't necessarily have that out there right now. And so being able to fully ingest data from every tool out there to build a full view of our environment would make it so much easier to build out these behavior and risk engines to understand identity. Being able to say what people are taking admin actions at what time, from what devices, from what locations, really just helps paint a picture. And without painting the picture, we're just staring at a blank canvas and trying to make a decision. And that's just never going to go well for anyone if we're just throwing darts in the dark.
So a shared, the signals framework.
Yeah, absolutely. Which you see more of. You see identity providers starting to contribute to what's called the shared signals framework, where things are being shared between the applications, but it's pretty small right now. There aren't a ton of applications or companies that are contributing to it. And so I'd love to see just more buy-in from those companies, from other companies, and being able to submit things to that framework to be shared amongst all applications.
That's a great patch. Well, Dmitri, thank you for joining us on this episode of Patch Me If You Can. If you like this episode, hit follow and share with someone who's ready to lead IT and security from the front. We'll see you next time.